He couldn't concentrate. His eyes kept rotating around the kitchen because he still hadn't recovered from the shock. Suddenly, he started to hear screams coming from his parents' room. The plate he was holding fell from his hand and shattered into pieces, freaking him out so badly that he almost passed out. He sprinted to his parents' room where he found them fighting for the first time. His siblings joined him there, turned and looked at each other with surprise, then at their parents, who were still seriously fighting and exchanging words. His elder brother hurried to them and grabbed one of their father's hands, which was already made into a fist to hit their mother. Instead, he hit Nelson's brother in the face and started to beat him up, asking him where he got such nerve to try to challenge him. That particular day was something else in their house. Their father left and didn't return for 2 days, something he had never done before. A few days later their maid returned. She noticed that Nelson wasn't his usual self and asked him what was wrong. He asked if he could trust her and tell her a few things, and she assured that he could. He told her everything, and thankfully she believed him. Telling him that she wasn't even a fan of dolls, they sneaked into Mitchell's room to pick up the doll and took it to the back of the house, where their maid set it on fire, but something mysterious happened. A little girl wearing a black dress emerged from the doll holding a knife, and right before Nelson's very eyes, she stabbed their maid who bled to death. Nelson couldn't scream, he was dumbstruck with his mouth agape. The little girl looked at him, still wearing this devilish look on her face, and it was then he got to see her real face. She was dark-complexioned with long shimmering hair, wearing a black knee-length dress. He stood there trembling in fear. As he began to take a few steps backward, eyes glued to her, and mouth still agape, he heard his mother call from the kitchen at the top of her voice. Deep down, he started praying for a miracle, so she would come looking for Pry at the back of the house. Pry was their maid's name. A young and hard-working lady. "Don't dare me." The little girl fumed in a deep baritone, pointing the knife at him. As she began to approach at this point, Nelson thought of screaming but decided to be quiet and just wait for a miracle. God answered him. "Nelson, what is it?" He heard suddenly. It was his mother. He turned swiftly to look at her and ran to her immediately. He started pointing at the little girl, but his mother held one of his hands as she started to walk up to their maid, lying lifeless on the floor in a pool of her own blood. Nelson immediately withdrew his hand and started pointing at the little girl again. "Pry, Pry," his mother called, kneeling beside her, shaking her. "What happened to her?" she screamed, looking up at Nelson, but realized that he was staring at something else. "What are you staring at? Go inside and call your dad for me," she exclaimed, but Nelson was still there, pointing at the little girl with his mouth agape. It was now obvious that his mother wasn't seeing her. "See," Nelson said to his mother, and pointing towards the little girl who was now walking slowly into the house. "What are you seeing?" his mother asked, with eyes glued to him. "The little girl has gone inside the house," Nelson managed to say. "Which little girl? From where?" his mother probed, already looking so scared. "Somebody help," she screamed, and his father came running to them. "What is it? What happened to her?" he questioned, squatting beside Pry. "Oh my God, was there a fight or something? Why is she bleeding?" he added, already feeling her pulse. "I don't know, I met Nelson standing over there while Pry was lying right here," his mother said, panting. They ended up carrying her to the hospital where she was confirmed dead. There at the hospital, as soon as his parents heard the news, his mother screamed and his father started to ask Nelson, what exactly happened to her. "Little doll girl stabbed her," Nelson said in tears with a bowed head. "How do you mean the doll girl stabbed her? What exactly are you trying to say?" His father fumed in anger. "If you and everyone else had believed me, this wouldn't have happened. The doll is human, Dad. I told Pry about it, and she believed as soon as I mentioned it to her, so we decided to set the doll ablaze. While at it, the doll transformed into a little girl and somehow she stabbed Pry. I'm just so scared right now. That doll is evil," Nelson said, sobbing with mucus dripping down from his nose. "Darling, please call the pastor. I beg you, call him now. This boy is possessed and I think is responsible for this," his mother said amidst tears. And immediately, his father covered her mouth and started to look around. "Will you keep quiet? What the hell? Are you trying to say you want these nurses to hear you and then believe that this little boy here stabbed your maid to death? What do you think will happen to him even if he is not the one responsible for it? At least keep your mouth shut and let the police do their investigations." His father whispered to his mother, "So you both don't believe me? You don't believe your own son?" Nelson managed to say in tears, pained and disappointed in them for not believing him. Pry's body was then deposited at the morgue, and it was time for them to go home, but Nelson blatantly refused, telling them that he would rather stay at a family friend's house instead of going to their home. This infuriated his mother as she took off one of her slippers and threw it at him. You must say what exactly happened to Pry. This boy needs to visit a rehab, his mother said, and his father again shut her up. After much arguing, his mother called their pastor, who arrived quickly, assuring Nelson that all would be well and that he should come in his car so they could go to their house together. He added that he would pray for Nelson and he would be fine somehow. Nelson obliged and followed. Nelson's parents also left for home, and as soon as they drove into their compound, the police arrived. Nelson's mother told the police that she had met him standing at the backyard close to Price's lifeless body and that she didn't know exactly what had happened. One of the officers approached and took Nelson to a corner. He started asking what exactly had transpired between Pry and Nelson, suggesting that Nelson should confide in him if he was responsible. "Don't worry, you can trust me. You're too young to go to jail, and I assure you that nobody will jail you. Just tell me what happened exactly as it is. Did you both have a fight? You know that some maids are fond of disrespecting someone, and there's nothing that anger cannot make one do," the officer said, but Nelson just stared at him in tears. Nelson was deeply hurt that his mother of all people could not even vouch for him. "I swear I know nothing about it," he managed to say. They decided to search the house. When they got to Nelson's room, one of the police officers found a kitchen knife under his pillow. "Jesus!" His mother screamed as soon as she saw it. "A knife? Nelson, what's a knife doing under your pillow?" His father asked, staring at him. "Dad, it's not me, it's the doll." Nelson said, already in tears, "Pastor, please talk to them. It's not me. I didn't put it there," he added. "Gentlemen of the force, is there something we can do about this case? I mean, can it be settled right here without going to the station?" The pastor asked. "This case is beyond what we can settle here in this house. I mean, it's a murder case, and it's way beyond all of us in uniforms here. This is his room, right?" The officer asked again to be sure, and Nelson's mother nodded frantically. "Pastor, please don't let them take me. You're a true man of God, right? Please say some prayers to that doll that Grandma gave to my sister. It's the cause of all these. I am innocent. Dad, please, don't let them take me away." Nelson pleaded at the top of his voice on his knees. "Officers, please, is there something we really can do? This boy is too young to serve any punishment that follows," his father pleaded, but the officers weren't ready to listen. "I'm sorry, sir, there's nothing we can do. It's because you're a known face around this place that I'm giving you the due respect. Your son needs to come with us to the station. We need to carry out some investigations." Nelson was in tears, turned and looked at his mother, who was weeping bitterly, and at that point he knew he was done for. Moving on, the officer in command had held Nelson's hand in a very tight grip. It was now very obvious that their pastor wasn't a messenger of God. How come he couldn't even detect anything? They took Nelson outside and were about to put him in their van when one of their neighbors came knocking on their gate, asking to see his father. The gate was left open, and as the man walked immediately into their compound, Nelson withdrew his hand from the police officer's grip and took to his heels. He ran outside their compound as fast as his legs could carry him, not knowing where he was heading. Nelson heard his parents screaming his name from afar. When he looked back, he saw the officers running after him, causing him to double his pace. He ran very far away from home, and had to stop when he noticed they were no longer pursuing him. He spotted a big bridge in the distance in the middle of the bush and hurried there, sitting under it. He continued panting like someone who had just finished a race. He stayed there for a few minutes looking left and right. He encountered different kinds of people, including those with mental issues, while some men in their early 30s and late 20s were there, smoking and drinking various substances. Though he was scared sitting alone among them initially, he summoned his courage and decided to answer any questions without fear. Then one of the men who had been smoking walked up to where he sat today, squatted beside him and puffed smoke directly into his face. "Hello, Bobo. What are you doing here?" the man questioned in a deep baritone. Nelson was frightened but tried to play along. "Good day, sir," he greeted, bowing his head. "Schoolboy, what is a small boy like you searching for here?" the man asked, puffing out another cloud of smoke. I'm sorry, sir," Nelson said, standing up. "I'd rather be on my way now, sir." He turned to leave, but the man immediately grabbed one of his arms. "I'm not pursuing you. Come on, sit down. Let's talk man to man," the man said, pointing at the spot where Nelson had stood up from. "No, sir, don't worry. Let me just leave," Nelson replied with a trembling voice. "Come on. Sit down, my friend. Did I ask you to leave?" Nelson shook his head. The man continued, "Then sit your little self down." His eyes popped and Nelson sat immediately. "What's your name?" the man questioned. "Nell." "Nelson, sir. Great, how old are you?" "I'm 10 years old, sir." "Just 10 years old? And what exactly brought you here? Where are you headed?" "Something happened in our house, and I was accused of it, so I ran away. Nelson, do you mind sharing what happened? When Nelson shook his head, the man continued, Okay, suit yourself then. When are you planning to return? Home, I don't know yet. Oh, okay. You can stay here if you want. Meanwhile, my name is Bob. Friends here call me Marley. He said with a grin. Okay, sir. Not accepted. Sir? Nelson asked, confused by what he meant. Marley, the man repeated with a grin. Okay, Marley. Good boy. Marley said, rubbing Nelson's head. Nelson stayed with Marley and his friends for a few weeks. Marley was a hustler who would do anything for money and always took Nelson along wherever they went during the day. They would go into the neighboring town to sell whatever they could find. Sachet of water, condemned iron, even drugs, and some items they stole, while others they bought cheaply from resellers who had stolen them. Marley ensured that Nelson always had breakfast, lunch, and dinner, keeping him well fed. One evening, they all went out together and Nelson saw a poster on an electric pole. It was of his father, who had passed away. Jesus! Nelson screamed, grabbing his head with both hands. The others, including Marley, quickly abandoned what they were doing and rushed to him upon hearing his voice. What is it, my guy? Are you okay? Marley asked, placing a hand on Nelson's shoulder. Nelson fell to the ground, wailing bitterly. I wish that Dad had listened to me, he muttered between sobs. Marley squatted beside him and whispered, Bobo, what is it that's wrong with you? Nelson looked up and pointed at the poster. Marley turned to look at it, then back at Nelson. What is that? What are you pointing at that? My father, Nelson said, still sobbing. Marley turned swiftly again for a second look at the poster. You mean that's your old man? When Nelson nodded, he added, You mean he didn't die before you left? No. Nelson managed through his tears. That's serious, Marley said. Then you need to go back home. Nelson looked at him sharply. No way, I'm never going back to that house. You know you haven't really told me anything. Just share the reason you left home with me. I promise I won't tell anyone about it. It's a long story. Nelson replied, Don't worry, I'm ready to listen. Nelson took a deep breath and bowed his head. The thing is, my grandma gave my younger sister a doll when we visited the village for Christmas, and that doll has been tormenting me so much that it killed our maid right before my very eyes. And I'm sure it's responsible for the death of my father. To Nelson's surprise, Marley burst out laughing. What's funny? Nelson asked, giving him an ugly look. Sorry, Marley said, raising both hands. It's just that, are you sure this isn't a fairy tale or something? Or a nightmare? I only see such things in movies, so it sounds unbelievable. He stared at Nelson, who stared back without blinking. Are you really sure about this? Nelson looked away immediately, then continued his story. I once caught my grandma speaking to it in her room, and do you know the funniest part was the day it killed our maid? It transformed into a little girl, wearing a black dress and holding a knife right before my eyes. She stabbed our maid to death in her stomach. You know? What? When Marley shook his head, Nelson continued. My siblings and even my parents didn't believe me. Only our maid believed. We were in the process of setting the doll ablaze that particular day, when it transformed into that little girl wearing a black dress. Unbelievable, Marley exclaimed, looking away. So that was why you ran away from home? Yes. After Pride died that day, and we left the hospital, my mom called the pastor who came with us. I was a little happy when I heard the pastor was following us home. Thought the whole thing was going to end. The torment and all. But to my surprise, the pastor didn't see anything spiritually. When we got to our place, then the officers arrived and searched my room, and found a kitchen knife under my pillow. I was on my way to the police station with them when I escaped. Sharp guy, Marley exclaimed. So shocking. What's your plan now? You need to return home for your father's burial, Marley said. God forbid. I'm never going to return to that house because of that doll. You should. Who knows if the doll is responsible for your dad's death? Nelson turned to look at him. That could be true, but I'm too scared to return. Don't worry. I will take you somewhere very early tomorrow morning before you go home. To one old man who takes care of our stuff around here. He'll give you something so you can get rid of that doll and also liberate your family. Nelson grabbed Marley's hands. You're going to do that for me? When Marley nodded, Nelson hugged him, saying thank you. The following day, they went to the old man's place, a native doctor. As soon as they entered his compound, the whole place was oozing with a bad smell that made Nelson hold his nose with 2 fingers. There were broken clay pots scattered about with dead chickens everywhere. The native doctor offered them seats and asked why they had come to see him. After Nelson narrated everything, the man brought out a brand new razor and gave Nelson some extremely painful incisions on his back, making him cry. After leaving, Marley put Nelson in public transport to go back home and gave him some money. When Nelson reached their gate, his heart started beating fast. He opened the gate and the first person he saw was Grandma. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her eyes fixed on him. "I should be asking what you're doing here. Aren't you supposed to be in the village?" "That is not my question. What exactly have you come here to do?" "Thought they said you ran away from home. And now that your father is dead, are you happy now?" she asked with a grin. "Look who's talking. Aren't you responsible for his death? Look, I saw you in your room, speaking to your evil doll. And since then your doll has been tormenting me." "Wait a minute. Your son is dead, isn't he? So what exactly are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be in the village, wailing, with people around you consoling you? Aren't supposed to be in the village waiting for his corpse to be brought home. So what exactly is your mission here this time?" "Oh, I can see that. You've got some guts. You've suddenly grown wings, haven't you? Looked like I used to be afraid of you, but not anymore. What exactly have we done to you? Why have you destroyed your own son's home? And I will not stop till I see the end of you all." She barked. "You will never see it. You already killed your son. I told them about the doll, but none listened to me. Now see what has befallen this home that used to be very happy and peaceful. What exactly have we done to you that you can't forgive us? You want to know?" Grandma roared, her shoulders raised high. "Yes. Tell me. I will tell you. Your father." Grandma was saying when one of their neighbors' sons, that's Nelson's brother's friend, who was coming out from their house, spotted Nelson. Nelson screamed and immediately Grandma vanished into thin air. Nelson didn't know what exactly the native doctor had done to him, but he was no longer afraid of anything to this day. He still questions himself about how he gathered such courage to challenge Grandma the way he did, which Nelson, his brother, asked, rushing out of the living room. As soon as he saw Nelson, he sprinted to him and gave him a very tight hug. "Where have you been? What happened to you? You've lost so much weight." Nelson just stood there, staring at the spot where Grandma had been standing. "Is everything okay?" Nelson nodded. "We've searched everywhere for you. Where exactly did you go?" "It's a long story," Nelson said, grabbing his brother's hand and taking him to a corner of the house as he didn't want anyone to hear what he had to say. "I saw Daddy's poster." "What happened to Father?" he asked with teary eyes. His brother let out a deep sigh. "Seriously, I don't know. He went into his room to change when he returned from work, so he could join us at dinner, and he never came out when it was taking too long. I went into his room myself to remind him that we were still waiting for him, only to find his lifeless body on the floor with stab wounds on his stomach." "What? And you guys are still in this house with that doll? The doll is responsible for all this. I wish you guys had believed me." "Oh, please, Nelson. It's not the doll. Well, the pastor said that the battle is from Grandma. You see, I told you guys, Grandma is evil, and she has a mission in our house. That doll she gave to Mitchell isn't just a doll but a monitoring spirit." "No, please don't misunderstand me. I mean the other Grandma's mom," David said, and Nelson's eyes widened in shock. "What? Mom's mom?" The pastor said that. When David nodded vigorously, Nelson exploded. "You're all crazy. That pastor is fake. Don't call him that. In fact, when the same officers came here to investigate Dad's death, they discovered that you were innocent, that you didn't kill Pry. They found another kitchen knife in the kitchen sink, and nobody knows who put it there. You still don't believe me, do you? Could you believe that I was talking to Grandma before Tega saw me, and to shock you, she disappeared into thin air right before my very eyes? You're not serious, you, that I know. You saw Grandma disappear, and you didn't scream?" David asked with a giggle. "Moreover, Grandma was never here." "Really? You know what? There's no point telling you what I know. You just need to be careful because you might just be the next victim. Next for when to die," Nelson said as he went inside the house. David stood there, staring at him with both hands on his waist until Nelson stepped inside. As soon as Nelson entered the living room, the first person he saw was the little doll girl. He paused. She was walking slowly into Mitchell's room, staring at him while he stared back. His mother was also in the living room with some people, and as soon as they saw him they screamed, but Nelson's attention was focused on the little doll girl that nobody else could see. To be continued. Thank you very much for watching. We have one more amazing episode to go. If you've enjoyed the story so far, please drop a comment below and don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the bell notifications so you won't miss any updates. Thank you, and remember, we love you.